Grassroots is brought to you by Work It, meeting the needs of entrepreneurs in Stillwater since 2017. Welcome to Grassroots, a podcast series for growing civic engagement through conversation. I'm Chris Peters.
And I'm Michelle Charles, and we're your hosts for this series.
Here is part 2 of our conversation with Will Joyce, running for re-election as mayor of Stillwater. So what books are on the docket?
Yeah, what do you like to read?
So what I'm reading right now, actually, over the course of, normally I'm a nonfiction sort of history sort of person. Over the course of the pandemic, I've found silly fiction to be much more enjoyable and much something
bit of an escape.
Something I'd rather read. Actually, right now, reading a collection of P.G. Woodhouse, Jeeves and Brewster stories.
Yeah.
Great, 20s just slapstick kind of comedy.
Oh, absolutely.
Fun stuff there. But I've got Team of Rivals that's sitting on my bedside table that I've been getting through the Doris Kearns Goodwin Lincoln book. That is one of those everybody is supposed to have read, and I've never really gotten through it. And so that's kind of if I have a serious moment of reading, that's what I'm reading now. But yeah, I've read, a bunch of Tom Clancy and Jack Reacher stories, and kind of the last couple of years I've spent a lot more time with fiction. The Crazy Rich Asians trilogy.
Oh yeah,
those books. They're
I have
really
not
good.
read the books, but I saw the movie.
Yeah, the books are really good. But yeah, that's kind of the stuff I've been picking up lately.
Okay, very good.
I just started watching Station 11 on HBO.
I don't know that.
The library was doing a whole. This is the fun part about actually putting the news in the newspaper, is I get to place all the library stuff. And so they had planned. So the story is based upon post-apocalyptic crazy flu virus wipes out most of the planet.
See, that doesn't sound like fun to read.
Yeah, that doesn't sound fun right now. And it was interesting because they were kind of preferencing hey, this is a series that we're going to be reading these books, and they even had the author on a Zoom and stuff. Yeah. And they were like, this was planned out before the pandemic. Yeah. Trust us. And so I was kind of interested in that. And then now the series is out on HBO, and I'm only 2 episodes in, and it kind of jumps around timeline wise. But yeah, it's kind of interesting for this time.
Yeah. I have read some of the Jack Reacher books, because I do like those types of things. They crack me up, though, because the film version, Jack Reacher, played by Tom Cruise.
Yeah. He's
like a
6'4" in the book. Than
Jack Reacher.
Yeah, I haven't seen any of the movies.
There's a series, actually.
Yeah. Well, of movies?
No, there's a new Jack Reacher series coming out.
I saw that, and I saw that they corrected the casting, and I can't remember who it is that's playing him in the TV series.
I don't know, but he's
somebody
tall.
Who actually is more like the character described in the book. I have this. This is one of those tangents that you may end up editing out, but I was an English major and watched movies for school. I mean, that's what I did.
Right.
And this whole translation of literature to film, like the books and movies, and that are almost always worse as movies than they are, as books. It's hard to imagine something that was a better. The only example I give people is Shawshank Redemption, which was a novella by Stephen King originally. And it's a good short story from Stephen King. It's really good, but the film is just so well done, and so compared to the book, things like people. I don't know if you're a big Lord of the Rings fan.
Oh yeah,
yes.
Oh yeah. That's actually the first series of books besides the Bible that I ever really got into and read the whole thing. Even the Silmarillion and the nerdy go off the deep end.
So I wasn't super into them as a kid. I read The Hobbit originally as a kid, but then when the movies were going to come out of the Lord of the Rings movies, I thought, I'm like, okay, I want to read the book first. And I try to do that.
Same
with
thing
most,
for me too. Yep.
And so I went through the whole series of books right before the films came out, and I, to this day, have still never finished one of the Lord of the Rings films. I can't watch them. Like they just make me crazy because the books are so good.
Yes.
And there's so, I mean, it's impossible, right? To turn 1,000 pages of books into a movie.
Yeah,
that's
you got to
watchable.
cut things.
Yeah,
you got to rearrange things.
Oh my gosh, I just can't do it. Like it just, I'm really picky about literature translated to
my
film.
hope is that, so we are transitioning. So we're talking about how, when you're trying to fit something in a 3-hour film or even a trilogy, we're like, okay, we're going to go 9 hours. Yeah. But now with the transition to, like a Game of Thrones style or something where we could have 10 seasons with 100, hour-long episodes, there might be a potential future for the next Lord of the Rings that is that style, and maybe they don't have to cut out like Tomba Baldi and all these other areas, and then they can maybe follow the books a little bit more, and maybe people will be able to like digest that better.
Well, I think that you're already seeing that a little bit with, for example, Dune, the latest screen treatment of Dune. They've chosen to do it in 2 installments, rather than the David Lynch 1980s version, which tried to cram it all into a 2-hour and however many minute movie. And then because it couldn't give all the backstory and the context,
character
it had this weird voiceover.
Yeah,
everybody was sitting there doing something, and then you could hear their thoughts over it. And in spite of having Sting in it, it was still a problematic movie for me. But I did like the newer version, but it did feel like a lot of exposition.
Yeah.
It was very exposition heavy. You're setting the scene, and then you're like, oh, so all the exciting stuff's going to happen in the next movie.
Yeah.
I'll just wait 2 more years.
We're my kids have seen all the Harry Potter movies, and the boys have all read the books, but my daughter hadn't read the books yet. And so we've been reading them together. The last few weeks, and we were reading. We're sort of still at the beginning of the first one. But she, just last night, learned that Hedwig, Harry's owl, is a girl. It's a female owl.
Right.
Which you learn in the books because it says she and, this sort of thing. Well, in the movie, like, she was just blown away the fact that Hedwig's a girl. Like, I didn't know Hedwig was a girl. But it's funny to, like, read them after, for her to be reading the books after having seen the movies, where she's like, oh, I didn't really, there's so much of that background. And I'm the same way with Harry Potter. I've actually never seen all of the movies in any of them completely.
Right.
Certain scenes I've seen, and I think they're really well done for, again, what they are. But you're taking just way too much to try to get, and so much of that detail. That's the kind of that's the part about books that's great. It's that all that little background and what's going on in somebody's head, and it's so hard to translate that to film.
Well, and I think, you brought up Shawshank Redemption, and I think that's one of the reasons that Stephen King's work has been so hard to bring to the screen, because so much of his horror is internal.
Yeah.
It's always, the evil thing figures out a way to exploit somebody's fatal flaw.
Yeah.
Or corrupts them in some way, and it happens over time. And it's this very internal process. And, and sometimes the people and love can, turn out to be, part of it. And I think that there's no good way to just show that in a film. And so it's very, very difficult to do, a lot of his work while on screen.
Absolutely. And that, again, way off on a rabbit trail here, but I wrote a paper in college about how Frank Darabont, who's the director of Shawshank Redemption, how he filmed violence in that movie to make it Stephen King like, right? Because the book is it's actually even less probably graphic than most Stephen King, but his depictions of violence in the movie are almost all off screen. They're almost all sound and oral rather than visual, right? It's a very, if you think about it, it's very graphic, and it's, there are parts of that movie where you're just like, oh my gosh, like I don't really want to watch this, but it's actually, the violence is not on screen in most of those scenes. And it does kind of create that almost what you're describing, that Stephen King, you're not really seeing it directly. You're almost feeling it, and you're hearing it, and you know what's happening, but you're not necessarily seeing what's happening. And it's really, I think, effective at translating some of that, what you're describing, right? It's not overt horror.
Right.
It's not like overwhelming one sense.
Yeah.
It's trying to get those other senses. Like in real life, if you're like, in danger or something, your ears are probably going to pick up something before your eyes know what's going on.
And when you see a picture of Red in his cell hearing something happening outside to somebody else, right, that translates to you as like you kind of feel what it's like to be sitting in this cell. You're not the one being beaten up or whatever. You're hearing this, and it's got that psychological sort of side to it, and that's why one of the reasons I think that film is so well done, because it does translate that well without just putting a bunch of blood and gore on the screen.
No, absolutely. And I think sometimes when you let people's imaginations fill in the blanks, they're going to imagine whatever's scary to them.
Yep.
So I think it can be more effective on an individual level too.
Yeah.
If you give people a little bit of space to fill in those blanks.
Yeah, it's interesting. Going a little bit back to the Hobbit is sometimes I'll make references, especially like when my birthday comes along, and I'm like, man, I wish birthdays were kind of like how hobbits did it, And people that watch the movie don't get that.
Yeah, that's
they kind of there's the scene of like, okay, Bilbo's throwing a party for everybody, but there's not really an explanation of on your birthday, you are the one giving to everybody else, and then everybody kind of does this re-gifting thing, and the book gets more into those details, into
Spends
that
50
Hobbit
pages
culture.
on that,
that
party.
Yeah, like why hobbits do things they do, and then the movies. I mean, they tried their best to fit that in, but time.
You can't get the whole thing.
Yeah. And that's where, books are timeless in a way, right? You could spend a year reading one book if you wanted to. You the reader gets to choose how much they want to absorb.
And you can read them over and over again and feel,
Right.
you didn't catch everything the first 2 or 3 times that you read it.
Mm-hmm.
That is true. And I have to say, I tend to just in general default to escapism when it comes to movies.
Yeah.
I do tend to do that, and there are certain, and I like dumb movies. I mean, you would think I was like a 13-year-old boy, like based
What's
on
the
the
last
movies
dumb
that I
movie
watched.
you watched, Michelle?
Talladega Nights. I have to watch it if it's on cable. I mean, if it's on TV and I'm flipping through the channels, I will stop and watch, the Ballad of Ricky Bobby.
That's a good one. I mean, those are the ones that, you can just you can zone out a little bit and just laugh at the parts that are going to be funny. And,
exactly. And it's like, there's nothing horrible. It's just goofy, and it just, kind of takes you away.
Yeah,
absolutely.
That part of going back to studying film in college, it does take a little bit of the fun sometimes out of just watching a movie for fun. Now I'm like, actually, Rochelle, when I was doing that in college, she'd be like, well, can we just watch a movie and not like take notes and
analyze it?
But we did. I received a Wentz undergraduate research grant while at OSU. One of the few times they were awarded outside of the sciences, right? I got a humanities research grant to do a project on the portrayal of presidents in film.
Very cool.
Political science / film kind of a project. And so focused on President Lincoln and President Nixon, because they're really the most, the presidents with the most film portrayals, and entirely opposite in terms of how they're portrayed, right? And so it kind of went into this whole, the sort of vilification versus the deification of Nixon versus Lincoln. And part of the research we got to do was to go to the Museum of Modern Art in New York and go to the D.W. Griffith archives. Griffith was one of the first narrative filmmakers.
Birth of a Nation.
Birth of a Nation, yes, but also had a Lincoln film.
Okay.
That he did. And so we got to go watch an original print of that and do some research into they've got all of his notes and, a lot of his materials and things at the museum in New York, and spent a lot of time kind of looking at how does it tell the story to us? I mean, because for most of the United States now, our understanding of history has come through Saving Private Ryan, and I mean, this is our literature. Film is our, this is our common literature. It's now, almost translated to long TV shows, right? I mean, the history of the West as told by Yellowstone, or I mean but that's the common understanding we have of historical events in a lot of ways, right? And the way we see Lincoln and the way we see Nixon in a lot of ways is colored by the films we've seen about these people, and how those films have been done to create very, I would say, caricatures of both of them, right? Because no one's ever as black and white as they are on the movie screen, right? I mean, we just talk about having to flatten a book down to something you can put on a screen, right? You've got to get rid of some of that nuance, or you can't fit it all.
Right.
You put somebody's life on screen, put somebody's presidency on screen.
You're doing that even more.
Yeah, you're flattening out so much, and it was a really interesting project and really a lot of fun, but really an interesting study in how we as a culture and we as people, we have to latch on to those touch points, right? Where we go, okay, well, this guy freed the slaves, this guy, had Watergate, whatever, and we kind of, and that becomes our whole picture of a person, especially when there's 4 films just about that one incident, right? Or there's, so it's an interesting and a little bit scary, I think, in the way we see history through a very narrow lens.
It's not a very nuanced way of looking at an entire human being. I mean, you've got Nixon, who absolutely Watergate, and he had all kinds of issues. I mean, he had all kinds of issues. But he also opened up relations with China. Mm-hmm. And I believe he's often rated as one of the more intelligent presidents that we've had. And Abraham Lincoln, I'm Native American, and a lot of my friends from college, were recently posting things about Abraham Lincoln signing off on a mass hanging of a bunch of Lakota warriors. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, not always so clear cut.
There is no movie about that incident in the Lincoln presidency.
Never seen that.
Right? No, I mean, you're right. And there's not a whole lot. I mean, the Nixon's China strategy is kind of out there, but you don't have anything where there's like this, you could write a really good, interesting movie that puts out there and that highlights Nixon and his relationship with China and his ability to connect people around the world in a way that hadn't been tried really at that point. But we don't have that movie either. Right. And so it's, again, from a popular perspective, those are incidents that don't really get, unless you're out there reading biographies, in-depth biographies of these presidents, you're not seeing those sides of them.
So as a film guy, what do you think about the tendency now to everything's either based on a comic book or it's like a remake or a reboot of something that's already been made? And I understand that there are no completely new ideas. Yeah. I mean,
everything's a remix.
Well, I mean, everything's a remix of Shakespeare, and then Shakespeare's pulling out biblical themes.
Yeah, which is a remix of the Bible.
Which is just, human stories.
Yeah, human stories are, I mean, there are a finite set of human stories. So there's a finite set of interesting human stories, right? Of dramatic, right? If you're trying to tell a dramatic story, if you're trying to catch somebody's interest and captivate them for 2 hours, there's only so much you can do, right? I mean, it's it's the hero, the villain, there's a formula there that works, and it's been the same for thousands of years that we've been doing drama as a species, right? I mean,
since Gilgamesh.
It is. Yeah. I mean, and so there's that, right? I mean, you're going to have the same structure in a lot of these things, but I think I agree that there's some issue about the way we do characters, right? I mean, with remakes and with everything being a comic book and, or whatever that's coming from a previously told story, you're getting that same character. And I think people feel comfortable with that, right? Because they know, right? When you make a Spider-Man movie, okay, well, I know Spider-Man, right? I know who this is. I know where he comes from. Yeah. I know, I have all that background, so I'm comfortable with this character. I don't have to think about who is this and why is he here and what's he doing and what, so when you get Marvel 28 or whatever one we're on at this point, you're not trying to figure out who's who, right? There's one new character where you're like, okay, whose side is he on? But a lot of it is just, it's comfortable, right? You can just focus on the fun parts, right? You don't have to think about, and that's one of the things I think with film, with new stories, a lot of it is, it's not the story, it's not the rise and fall of the action that's new, it's the people and the situation that someone is in, and those movies are challenging, right? Because you kind of figure out who is this person, and do I like them, and I think the part of the what you see now with characters is that they're so middle of the road, right? They're all good and bad, right? We've got this whole film has really stopped doing, has kind of tried to get away from this white hat, black hat,
right?
Good guy, bad guy, and they've created these characters that are just like so ambiguous.
They're complicated.
Oh my gosh! I mean, the
so
TV shows, the Breaking Bad,
Game of Thrones,
the
anti-heroes,
what's the Mad Men, right? I mean, those are really difficult to watch for a lot of us that kind of look at it and go, well, I don't really like any of these people. I mean, am I supposed to like this guy? Am I not supposed to like him? What am I?
When the first couple came out, it was like, oh, this is different.
Yeah.
Because it's not so clear cut, and someone who's a good guy can do bad things, and someone who's a bad guy can do something heroic.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like real life. And at first that seemed a little refreshing, but now they're all that way.
And now it's The Sopranos set in Madison Avenue. It's The Sopranos set on a ranch in Wyoming or Montana. Right. It's it's kind of gotten that same.
Right.
These are all now just sort of remakes of a conflicted boss of some kind. Who's good and bad and does, so you have that same sort of thing.
Sure.
I mean, but that's that character, right? That taking a new person and putting them in an interesting situation and figuring out how are they going to deal, right? How are they going to interact in this scenario?
Sure.
That's hard, right? That's the hard part of coming up with something new and creating a new story. And I think that's, it's a lot easier if you just kind of take that formula, right? Whether it's the good guy and the bad guy, or whether it's the conflicted anti-hero or whatever it is. I mean, you kind of now at this point, you just kind of have those patterns that we use.
It's kind of funny. I've finally gotten my husband to watch some sci-fi. He is not a science fiction guy. He likes war movies. He likes westerns.
Yeah.
He likes things that are rooted in a reality that he recognizes, generally speaking. I got him into The Mandalorian because it's basically a western.
Yeah.
I mean, and now we're watching the Book of Boba Fett, which is super like a western. Yeah. It even has a soundtrack of a western. So, anyway, it's just interesting how you can see the different, I don't know, the different influences of things and the universality of these stories.
Yeah.
I mean, The Mandalorian, after a while, it's like, okay, he's like Cain. He's wandering around trying to do something, and now he's going to help these people this week.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting also with these stories is now the mix of, okay, so like Spider-Man, for example. Well, now the actor, somebody playing Spider-Man, now might be a different color.
Yeah.
Or I think in the comic books, Thor is now like a female. And so, I mean, those comic books, they're always how to keep a story fresh is just remix some things. But then it allows, it allows maybe for that little girl growing up to go and see like, Captain Marvel.
Yes.
Captain Marvel was originally not a female. And so now, little girls can go up and like, yeah, it could be the strongest character in the whole Marvel universe or, at the time, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of fun and interesting too.
And I think
and challenging for some people who want things to stay the same.
Well, and that's the reason we need new stories, right? Or we need new ways of looking at the same old stories is, literature, film, whatever it is, art is supposed to tell us something about ourselves or show us the world in a certain way or get us to look at the world in a certain way. And when you've got retread sort of stories over and over again, right? They're not teaching you anything new about the world or the way to look at the world. Well, when you can come up with different ways to say, okay, yeah, this is a Marvel comic movie, but we're casting the hero differently, or we're putting them in a different situation, or making them somebody where you go, wait a second, she's female, or she's, this is a different way of looking at it, right? And this is it can have that effect of saying, okay, this is the same story, we've got the same general storyline with the same general idea, but now it's causing me to look at my world, or look at the world, or examine myself in a different way. And that's, I think, where you can bring in that originality, and why that's helpful, and why it's cool to be able to take some of those old stories but recast them in a way that gets people to think.
Well, and talking about, say, Crazy Rich Asians.
Yeah.
I mean, and I'm thinking in terms of representation, which is hugely important. I think that there are a lot of stories that have portrayed heroic characters or people who had a lot of agency in certain ways that maybe some people couldn't easily relate to. The idea that if a kid can see someone who looks like them, doing something, then they feel more like they can do it. So I think that representation is really, really important, not just in terms of, say, okay, we're going to make Spider-Man black.
Yeah.
But it's like that representation of different cultures, so that people outside that culture can also come to have an appreciation and understanding of it. Crazy Rich Asians, I mean, huge hit, rom-com, but also set within a very specific world that helps you to maybe understand a culture that you might not be familiar with.
Absolutely. And a pretty standard rom-com. Right.
Yes,
I mean, there's
very
nothing
much
groundbreaking about it even from the books. Right. I mean, it's Jane Austen in Singapore.
Exactly.
I mean, it's kind of but that's what's so cool about it. Right. Because it is a common, you're not, the story itself is not groundbreaking, but seeing the different culture, seeing the way a different culture interacts in these settings. Right. I mean, when you've got a love story that's not happening in Central Park, it's happening somewhere else in the world, you get to see how different people and different cultures handle these sorts of relationships and what kinds of things come up. And there's a lot of universality to it,
sure,
but there's also a lot of, that's a different kind of culture and a different sort of outlook on how this works. I think I was going to, also mention the way Disney movies have sort of branched out. I mean, as when we were growing up, the difference in Disney movies were basically the hair color of the princess.
Sure.
Right? I mean, it was blonde or redhead or brunette.
Sure.
I mean, it was basically the same.
That was it.
Right. And now, I mean, my daughter and her friends were over at the house yesterday painting or doing some kind of a craft and listening to the Encanto soundtrack and
it's on repeat in our house.
And it's really cool. I mean, from a storyline perspective, it's the same basic storyline generally.
Sure.
But they're now singing different kinds of songs in different languages, and I mean, there are lyrics that and so it's and I think for my daughter to sort of see that broader world, but also for a little girl who comes from a different background than my daughter to see her background or her culture on screen in a Disney movie, is such it really does make a difference.
And I think also, I mean, as a woman, I look at these characters now, and they're not sitting there waiting to be saved by a prince. I mean, they're saving people. They're the ones with the agency. They're going out and sometimes, making people angry to go fight the battle themselves.
Or save the prince themselves.
Or to save the prince. Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, that's kind of a cool thing, too.
Frozen was so... I think Frozen was the first one that I sort of we watched in the theater, and I was watching it going, whoa, this is not the normal Disney storyline. This one's a little different.
Yeah, the guy coming in to be a prince, a little bit deceitful.
Yeah.
And then the kind of, bumbling guy that just wants to live with his deer or elk or whatever.
Reindeer.
Yes. Right.
Reindeers are better
just
than
wants to be
people.
left alone, make some ice, and do about his business. And then, he's got to go follow around these princesses while they try to save the world.
Exactly. There you go. And he's kind of in the support role.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, kind of a cool thing.
Yeah,
so film, I mean, that's... Okay, so let's go back to the Stillwater movie then.
Oh, okay.
I recently, a Facebook friend of mine said they went to see it, and they were very disappointed because it wasn't, I think it wasn't as action-packed as they had expected. But then also, I think she just felt kind of bummed out at the end of it. And there were no real clear, she wanted a hero. she had hoped for a happy ending, maybe didn't get either. What's your take on that as a film guy?
So it's a really, it was really an interesting movie. I saw it. I think I've seen it twice now. It's kind of two movies in one, right? There's the sort of the storyline of his relationship in France, and then with I can't remember the character's name, but with the French woman that helps him out,
right.
And then there's the storyline with his daughter, and they're sort of different movies almost. Neither one of them is an action movie. Neither one of them is what I think people expected. Taken, or one of those.
Sure.
Those trailers, man. Those fast cut trailers.
They did. They kind of I think hurt themselves with the way they did that, but. I really enjoyed the film, and I think you're right. You kind of get to the end of it, and I mean, honestly, I think his daughter is the bad guy in that movie. I think she's the one who never really learns anything. She doesn't change. She doesn't, she tricks basically people into letting her out of prison, even though, I mean, this was really in this story, and I know there's been a whole lot of talk about the Amanda Knox that it's based on that really doesn't follow the storyline at all. But
sure.
But in the movie, she manipulates and
right.
She kind of ends up you kind of look at her at the end and go, man, you didn't learn anything here. You didn't, nothing is better off because of you. But I think certainly, and I honestly, it kind of goes to this, what we're talking about with that experience of another culture, right? I mean, it's kind of the fish out of water, you take the Oklahoma oil guy and put him into France and he learns that, oh, well, maybe the world isn't, as crazy outside of my normal experience as I think it is. And maybe there are people that I can get to know. And, he kind of has that growth experience and kind of comes back. And I think even the fact at the end with kind of the way you can see he feels about his daughter, I mean, you can kind of, I think, see in his performance that he's not happy about what she's done. And he kind of feels like she has manipulated her way into this situation. And just him recognizing that, right? Him not being all rah about, I don't really care. We got my daughter back. I mean, he's conflicted about it at the end. And so it's subtle for sure. And it's not something that you kind of jump up and down and go, oh yay, there's a great, I mean, it sort of reminded me a little bit of No Country for Old Men.
Right.
And the end of that, which by the way is a really good film adaptation of a really, really good book. But it's kind of got that a bit of ambiguity, but I think you do see in Matt Damon's character that kind of like, maybe the world isn't what I thought it was. And I can't remember the line at the end, but she says, I think they're sitting on the porch and she says, yeah, it's, always come home. Everything always looks just the same as it always did. And he says, I think it looks completely different.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And that's kind of, I mean, honestly, a little bit even heavy handed with the way they
right.
did that last line. But yeah, I mean, he has gained a different perspective on the world and she hasn't.
Right. And just that look on his face, that look in his eyes as he says that. I mean, my whole thing too, and you're right, that section where he's living in France, I mean, it's kind of almost this interlude for him, right?
Yeah.
It's like this opportunity for redemption. Because this is a guy who views himself as, a guy who messes things up, right? Mm-hmm. He messed up his family life. He got in trouble with the law. He wasn't there for his daughter. He feels that he carries this tremendous guilt. In some way he formed her or didn't form her in a way that led to her situation. And, and he's trying to do what he can to make it right. But I think on some level, he just feels kind of like a guy who messed it up. Mm-hmm. And then this is his opportunity to have that family life and to, kind of be that stand-up guy and take care of a little girl and do that. And then at the end, I mean, in order to save the other daughter, in his mind anyway, he messes it up. But he's learned something. And he's learned that he's capable of living a different way. And he's gotten outside of his comfort zone and even outside of like his normal, I don't know. I mean, just where he would normally go. Mm-hmm. And I think learned something about the world and himself.
Yeah, even that just sort of sense of self-awareness, right, that you can tell he has at the end where he understands, what happened and why it happened, and that seems new for him, right?
Right.
And, I think at the beginning you sort of see this like, well, I just do what I do and things happen, right? And at the end he's much more of a, okay, well, now I understand at least why we're in the situation we're in and why I had to make decisions I had to make.
See, and I kind of leave it with a sense of hopefulness, at least for him, that having this new awareness, maybe now that gives him a few of the tools or some of the knowledge and awareness that he needs to go out and build a better life for himself. Something that he's going to find more happiness and satisfaction in.
Yeah, I think it kind of...
before he's going through the motions.
Yeah.
It kind of leaves you at the end of like, well, what decision is he going to make? You could totally see him maybe, you know, getting his daughter back going, and then you could even see maybe he, you know, wants to reconnect with those in France. Like, you know, he's got more possibilities now for himself that he didn't give himself originally. So
yeah, I don't think she's going to take him back.
Well, I don't think
that's an option.
About, right?
I think that's
the daughter
done.
asks him that at the end. Asks something about like, do you see, you know? And he says, no, I think she's gone or whatever.
Yeah, he said, I can't. He said, it doesn't mean it wasn't good.
Yeah.
I can't go back, but it doesn't mean it wasn't good.
But I think you're right, Chris, that he, you know, you kind of do walk out of it thinking this guy's going to be better. He's going to do better going forward than he did when we first met him. And conversely with the daughter, I mean, you kind of look at it and go, well, yeah, it's the same place it's been. She's going to end up in the same place. You know, she's going to end up in the same sort of trouble at some point, you know, because she hasn't really learned that. So.
Yeah. In part 3 of our conversation with Will, you will hear his thoughts on the duties of City Council and government's role to create public health policies. Thanks again to Work It for sponsoring this series. For more information about Studio Stillwater and how you can help support our mission as a listener or sponsor, go to studiostillwater.net. There you can sign up for emails, get a free sticker, or send us a message. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.